Around 1300 before the Common Era, a merchant ship went down off southern Turkey. Cemal Pulak's excavation team recovered its cargo beginning in 1984. They worked the site for 11 field seasons. The hold contained 10 metric tons of copper ingots and 1 metric ton of tin. The ratio is 10:1, that is the exact proportion required to produce bronze. These metals were loaded in alloy proportion before the ship left port. The copper came from Cyprus and the Aegean. The tin did not. It had already crossed hundreds of miles, possibly thousands, before it reached this vessel. The ship went down with its cargo still aboard. The distance the tin had already travelled is the subject of this episode. Cemal Pulak of the Institute of Nautical Archaeology directed the Uluburun excavation from 1984 to 1994. His 1998 report is the definitive account of the cargo. The ship dated to around 1300 before the Common Era. That is approximately 2 centuries before the collapse. The cargo was not random. Tin and copper arrived together in fixed alloy ratio. The coordinations existed before the ship was loaded. Carol Bell's 2012 study of the Ugarit Merchant Archive reveals what that coordination looked like on land. The merchants of Ugarit did not trade tin casually. They operated under royal contract. A merchant named Sinaranu held a state license to handle metal imports directly. The Ugarit tablets record tin in shekels for small amounts and in talents for bulk shipments. The quantities are tracked, named, and institutionalized. These are not the records of incidental commerce. Bell's argument is specific. Tin procurement at Ugarit was a managed state activity, not opportunistic trade. The palace required bronze. Bronze required tin. The palace therefore required tin. The entire sequence depended on the continuation of a supply chain the palace did not control end to end. No single Levantine state managed the full route from source to port. Each managed only its segment. The dependency was built into the architecture of the system, not into any single actor's decision. Sophia Stein's isotopic analysis of late Bronze Age tin ingots attempted to identify their geographic origin. The analysis included samples from the Uluburun cargo itself. The results were inconclusive. Candidate sources remain Badakhshan in Afghanistan, the Zarafshan Valley in Tajikistan, and Cornwall in Britain. This dispute is acknowledged and set aside. The argument does not rest on where the tin originated. It rests on how far the tin travelled, and through how many intermediaries before it arrived. The question is not where the tin came from. The question is what happened when it stopped arriving. Bronze required both copper and tin simultaneously. There was no single metal substitute. Copper came from Cyprus and the Aegean, tin did not. Every bronze-producing state in the late Bronze Age depended on the same distant supply network. The missing ingredient was the same everywhere. The Ugarit merchant system makes this dependency visible in institutional form. The state organized tin procurement through licensed merchants. Sinaranu held his contract under royal authority. The tablets tracked incoming tin by weight. These records show the procurement system had been running long enough to become taken for granted. Bell's reading is precise. The state built its production capacity on the assumption that procurement would continue. The organization that worked without interruption had no documented contingency for interruption. Tin from Badakhshan or the Zarafshan Valley did not arrive by a direct route. It moved through Mesopotamian intermediaries, reached Levantine ports, then crossed open water by ship. Each stage required a different set of actors. No Bronze Age state controlled all of them. The Uluburun wreck shows the final stage of that journey. The ingots in its hold had already travelled through multiple hands. A failure at any earlier stage meant no tin arrived at port. Iron existed in the late Bronze Age. Tutankhamun's tomb contained an iron dagger, confirmed as meteoric iron, not smelted. In diplomatic correspondence of the period, iron was treated as more valuable than gold. Smelted iron technology existed in limited form. It had not scaled to production for tools or weapons. Snodgrass, in the Dark Age of Greece, dates iron dominance across the eastern Mediterranean to around 1000 before the Common Era. That is approximately 2 centuries after the Bronze Age collapse. The Iron Age was not a planned alternative. It was a material response to the disappearance of bronze. Around 1200 before the Common Era, bronze production ceased across the eastern Mediterranean. The cessation is documented in the archaeological record, not in texts. Bronze working installations, tool deposits, and weapon assemblages all show the same abandonment horizon. That horizon appears within the same stratigraphic period at sites with no direct contact with one another. The network's reach was also the mechanism of its synchronized failure. Even if the tin had come from multiple geographic sources, the routing converged. The same Levantine ports, the same Mesopotamian intermediaries, the same sea lanes. Multiple origins did not produce multiple routes. Disruption propagated because the network had a shared architecture. In 755 of the Common Era, and Lushan, military governor of 3 northeastern frontier commanderies, revolted against the Tang court. The rebellion was not about trade, but its consequences fell directly on trade. The Tang dynasty maintained its military alliances through silk. Silk was not merely a commercial export, it was the currency of diplomatic obligation. Allied cavalry forces on which the Tang depended were paid in silk. The silk trade was therefore a military instrument. Denis Twitchett's edition of the Cambridge History of China documents this dependency in institutional detail. Valerie Hansen's study of the Silk Road draws on Dunhuang administrative documents. It confirms the state management of the Central Asian route, and Lushan's forces captured Luoyang in 755. Chang'an fell in 756. The Tang court withdrew its garrisons from the Central Asian corridor to address the revolt. The military nodes at Dunhuang, Kucha, and Kashgar were stripped. Tibetan forces moved into the vacated positions by around 763. The Tang never fully re-established control of the Central Asian Silk Road. The route that had sustained its diplomatic and military system for generations was no longer available. The supply structure had failed, not because anyone had targeted it, because the governance that maintained it had collapsed internally. The parallel to the Late Bronze Age is structural. Different commodity, different geography, different century. In both cases, the state organized a long-distance multi-leg supply chain around a single strategic commodity. In both cases, the commodity was both a production input and a military instrument. In both cases, the dependency was invisible during normal function. In both cases, the collapse of internal governance revealed the dependency. Each segment of the route appeared functional to the actors managing it. The system had no mechanism to display its own fragility. The dependency was not visible as a vulnerability until the supply stopped. This pattern has a name: single commodity system-wide collapse. A civilization concentrates its production capacity on one material. That material comes from a distance. It moved through a multi-leg network organized for efficiency. The network functions correctly for generations, and in functioning correctly, it produces no record of what would happen if it stopped. The dependency is invisible precisely because the system works. The feature that makes this structural is not negligence. It is optimization. The Uluburun ship was loaded with precision. The Ugarit tablets tracked tin to the shekel. The Tang court paid its cavalry with silk and called it diplomacy. All 3 systems had been refined into vulnerability. A network without redundancy has no recovery. If this episode is useful to you, subscribe to Omen History. New episodes every day.